It's the Friday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. The Eagles held off the Vikings and in a dominant fashion in the trenches. I want to talk about the Eagles, how far can how much they dominate the trenches take them this season, and what are the Vikings this year? All that and more here with our Week 2 picks on the Friday episode of Locked On NFL. It's Chris Carter and David Harrison. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast here in the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your host, Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, David Harrison of Locked On Bucks and Locked On Commanders. David, it was an interesting Thursday night football game that we'll get to it here in a minute. Eagles, Vikings. The Eagles came out on top in the end, but there was a bit of drama in this one. But also a reminder that this show is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. David, look back at this game. 34-28 was the final score. The last touchdown the Vikings get was kind of in garbage time. I mean, they got an onside. They went for an onside kick, couldn't get it in the end. And I was impressed by things that Kirk Cousins did. He went 31 of 44 for 364 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Did give up a fumble, but he did what he could to keep the game in it. But the Eagles showed, even if your opposing quarterback throws 4 touchdowns and 364 yards, and our quarterback throws 193 yards and only a touchdown, if you dominate the line of scrimmage, you have a pretty good chance to win the game. That's what the Eagles did in this game. They outrushed the Vikings. The Vikings here, I think it was 28 yards for the Vikings, and I'm looking at the numbers here, 259 yards for the Eagles. The both sides of the Eagles' offensive line and defensive line just crushed the Vikings all night.
Yeah. Big shout out to Gino Camilleri, Locked On Eagles, tweeted shortly after the game. The Philadelphia Eagles almost outrushed the Minnesota Vikings by 10 times.
Yeah.
In this one game alone. And it just goes back to, the first people I heard say it, and I don't know if they created it, but the first people I heard say it were Daniel Jeremiah, Bucky Brooks, of NFL Network, former NFL scouts, all that stuff. And they said it's really hard to be bad when you're good in the trenches, and it's really hard to be good when you're bad in the trenches. And the Philadelphia Eagles, I mean, we talked about their offensive line all last season, talked about them, for the most part being able to come back this season. But then you flip it on the other side, even the defensive line and the improvements that they're trying to make there to stabilize that unit and bring up some young talent there. I mean, just domination is the only way you can say it. You know what I mean? And I know that they had, on the commentary, I'm a Buckeye fan, so Kirk Herbstreit's on there. So obviously I like seeing him on any type of broadcast, but they bring up Woody Hayes over and over and over again. That's a coach that I grew up hearing my dad tell me stories about because I was too young to watch him. But, my dad's telling me stories about the old days. And I remember like the Eddie George Buckeyes and the Beanie Wells Buckeyes and just running the ball down your throat and then hitting you with a mobile quarterback that can throw the ball enough to do damage when you're sinking up too close to the line of scrimmage, for your own good. And that's exactly, I mean, if the Eagles were wearing scarlet and gray, I think this was an Ohio State game that we just got done watching, beating the Minnesota Golden Gophers. And, for Vikings fans who are also Minnesota fans, it probably hits a little too close to home. But I mean, that shows you why the Eagles are a team that I think every year we wonder, are Super Bowl teams going to be able to recapture that magic and become and stay competitive? And even for some of the flaws that they've had, because it wasn't a perfect game for the Eagles either, but even for some of the flaws they have, you can still see this is going to be a team that is going to be in the conversation come late December, early January.
I agree. That's why I wanted to ask you, is this a team when we get down to the final teams in the NFC, the top teams in the NFC? The Niners obviously had a strong week 1 showing. The Cowboys had a strong week 1 showing. The Eagles, they didn't look too strong against the Patriots. Whereas this game ended up looking close at the end. I think this was the kind of showing that you wanted to show from Philadelphia, to be like, oh no, we're still top dogs in this conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially coming into a Thursday night game. You know, everybody, we hear all the stories about Thursday night games, you know, the difficulties in moving on. You basically, by the time you hit the plane or the bus or your car to go home after your first game, you pretty much have to put that thing in the glove box and call it done and get moving forward towards your next game. So there's really not a lot of opportunities to develop, I suppose, from your first game to your second, or from your last game to your Thursday night game, whenever that game happens to be on your schedule. And so that's why you never want to see a team going from like a really embarrassing situation into a Thursday nighter. And we always talk about, well, the good news, they have an opportunity to get that taste out of their mouth really quickly. The problem is they never had the opportunity to rinse that taste out of their mouth to begin with. So you're really just trying to cover up a good taste with over the bad taste, if that analogy makes sense. But for the Philadelphia Eagles, little to no time to really repair what didn't go well against New England. So you basically have to take it, just ride with it, and try to come out with a win. And I think they still showed improvements. While the Minnesota Vikings, I mean, for my Locked On Buck show, watching them play the Buccaneers in Week 1 at home, it was really just more of the same. Not as many turnovers and certainly more touchdowns, but it was basically the same Vikings team that I saw in Week 1 here in Week 2, and that just kind of reinforces what I talked about. But oh, by the way, they lost 2 more tackles in the process in this game, and so that's going to be a problem moving forward.
It certainly is, and that's my next question. What's the ceiling for these Vikings? Like last year, they won the division, but now they're 0-2 to start the season. And I also want to point out this game can go very differently if Justin Jefferson just doesn't fumble the ball into the end zone at the end of the first half. If he catches that, if he holds on to that ball and they turn that into a touchdown, then that is a 10-point swing. I'm not sure if the Eagles then ride the momentum to get a field goal at the end of the first half. And you're talking about a game they lost by 6 points. This would be a whole different ball game if that fumble doesn't happen. And it seems like that's just sometimes the Vikings' luck when you look back at things. But on top of that bad luck, they're 0-2. Of their next 5 games, 3 of them are against the Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Niners. They're up against some really tough opponents. Not that the Eagles weren't tough themselves, but they're up against some really tough opponents. They could find themselves in a big hole early to start if they don't start getting it in gear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 5 losses before Halloween, certainly well within reach for this Minnesota Vikings team that won 13 games just last season. I mean, and you go back to last year, and I know Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings spent a lot of time defending the one score wins, but everybody outside of Minnesota said that's great that you're doing that, but this is not a sustainable model. Being in these one score games and having a break go your way, a tip pass fall into your defender's hands in order to win these games is not a sustainable model. And you almost wonder, like, I kind of wish we had like an all access docu series or something about the Minnesota Vikings, because I'd like to hear what these messages were in the offseason. Like, I feel like this is a team that essentially came into 2023 trying to prove to everybody that 2022 wasn't a fluke. When we know that the most successful teams in the NFL, whether it be the Steelers coming off of playoff runs or the Eagles coming off of a Super Bowl loss or the Chiefs coming off of wins, the best teams in the NFL forget last season. Last season doesn't matter anymore. But I feel like this is a team that came in looking to prove that last year is justified, but they also did it not understanding, I guess, really who they were, because you're a team that won a lot of one score games, but then you come in here with KJ Osborne. They talk about KJ Osborne like he's another number 1 receiver, and the dude is dropping passes left and right in both games this season. They get rid of Dalvin Cook, who they didn't have to get rid of in this offseason, a 4-year running Pro Bowl running back for an unproven commodity in Madison. And we talked about this pre-recording. We both like Madison, but he's unproven as a starting running back. Dalvin Cook was at least proven, and I feel like it was, well, let's get out of that before we get burned by it. And if you're a team that's trying to be in a championship window, you're going to have to take some of those risks of maybe you find out too late that a guy is past his contract, but you don't release a dude coming off of 4 straight Pro Bowl seasons to go with a guy who is not a proven starting running back in the NFL when you don't have to. And the Minnesota Vikings didn't have to. Even if they wanted to re-sign TJ Hawkinson, they didn't have to get rid of Dalvin Cook, but they did.
I hear you on there. The Vikings have some tall tasks ahead of them moving forward. I think that's something that everyone's going to be looking at. The Eagles, though, they have the Buccaneers, the team that you cover, coming up next Monday night for another primetime matchup. They got the Commanders, Rams, and Jets. Maybe they're a team that could keep riding the hot hand like they did much of last season. but we'll keep you up to date on everything here on the Locked On NFL podcast. The other side of the break, we've got our week 2 picks for me and David. We'll break down every matchup Sunday and Monday. We got 2 Monday Night Football games, by the way, this week. That'll be exciting. We'll get to all of those here on the other side of the break of the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter, David Harrison, breaking things down for you. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the website and the app that you need to have right now in your back pocket to help you buy tickets to your favorite events. And that process shouldn't be stressful. Whether you're trying to get sports tickets, music concerts, comedy events, theater events, anything near you, Game Time most likely has killer deals available, even on last-minute tickets. If you missed the early registration periods, Game Times is the best app to catch up, find the best deals to get you into your favorite events, and they have a best price guarantee that just can't be beat. Go download the Game Time app today, right to your phone. You can get an exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and events, and much, much more. The Game Time best price guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and same row for less for the same event somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. That's just how confident they are. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back here on the Locked On NFL podcast, the Friday edition with Chris Carter and David Harrison. We've broken down Thursday night football, so let's get into some Sunday football with our picks here. David, we open up with the Packers at the Falcons. The Falcons, according to our sponsors at FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America, the Falcons are 1.5-point favorites after both teams started off the season 1-0. I do believe the Packers lucked into getting the Bears in week 1, and the Bears just looked utterly abysmal. But I'm still going with the Packers in this matchup. I kind of like what I saw from Jordan Love. I know they did with some injuries, but I think that they'll have enough on their side to handle the Falcons and at least slow down that running game that they're living off of.
Yeah, that's kind of the big thing for me is those injuries. Christian Watson, I don't think he's playing. He hasn't practiced at all this regular season through Thursday, so I don't think he's going to be playing this game. But Aaron Jones is the big one. If Aaron Jones doesn't go, I think my vote swings to the Falcons. But if Aaron Jones can go, then I think that the Packers can pull it off.
That's an interesting thing there. Let's move it on to the team that you cover, the Bears at the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers pulled off the upset. A lot of people, including myself, counted them out against the Vikings. They pulled off the upset. Now they're at home against the Bears, who played abysmally against the Packers last week. The Buccaneers open as 2.5-point favorites here on FanDuel Sportsbook. David, I'm riding with the Buccaneers. I like the way they played out when I was able to go back and watch parts of that game. I didn't like a lot of things I saw from Chicago. I think the Buccaneers will ride this one.
Yeah, I got to go Bucks here too. I mean, we know very little about both these teams. A lot of changes on both of these teams right now, but just looking at week 1, the way the Bears came out, the way the Buccaneers came out, the Buccaneers look like a team with a lot of turnover that they know what they're doing with those changes. The Bears look like a team with a lot of new pieces that they don't know what to do with, and some of the pieces that aren't so new just apparently don't want to be part of the action. So I think you got to go Buccaneers, especially, Baker Mayfield was on the Quarterback Room podcast recently with Jordan Palmer and Kyle Allen, 2 former, quarterbacks themselves. And he talked about the halftime adjustments that Dave Canales and him made in that Minnesota Vikings game. And when you look at the differences, first half, Baker Mayfield completed, I think, like 40% of his passes. Second half, he came out and completed, I think, 79% of his passes. Like, the difference in what they were able to do from one half to the next shows that even though they don't have the perfect plan coming out, these guys are in sync. They're on the same page, and they know how to communicate. And I think that's incredibly valuable this early in the season.
Another team I think is figuring out how they want to play, or knows how they want to play now. It's the Detroit Lions. They came out, they beat the Chiefs in week 1. Now they're back at home, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is calling for the fans to wear blue ski masks to the game. I do wonder if people are going to buy into that. But the Lions they are 4.5-point favorites at home against the Seahawks, who I thought were going to do a much better job against the Rams last week. So I'm riding with the Lions at home. Blue ski masks and all. I think they do the job there. David, what say you?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Lions here. I think it's interesting. The NFL sent out a circulation earlier on Thursday, and I think they said that this game last year, it was like 80 points or something like that combined between the total score between these two teams. So this is a shootout last year. We'll see what it is this year. But I like where the Lions are going. I think the upset win really gave them a lot of confidence, but not cockiness. I don't think Dan Campbell lets his guys get cocky, and I like the Lions to win this one.
The Bills are 8.5-point favorites over the Raiders. The Bills are at home. Man, I know the Bills stunk it up on Monday Night Football and found a way to lose to Zach Wilson. When this is supposed to be their year, their chance to really give Josh Allen one last big ride with the current core that they have to win this game, David. And that's a lot of points. I'm not sure if I take all the points there, but they have to beat the Raiders with how bad they are this year.
I mean, they do, and even with the struggles they had against the Jets, I think you still got to lean Bills here. But I'm with you. I think I go money line. I'm not touching that spread. You know what I mean? If you're a Raiders fan,
right.
Maybe take the 8.5 points and hope that your team can at least make it close. But I mean, look, if Max Crosby can do some damage against that offensive line and get to Josh Allen, I mean, we could see a repeat, honestly. So it's going to depend on how well they can protect Josh and keep Stephon from getting frustrated.
The Chargers are 3-point favorites on the road against the Titans, who lost week 1 in bad fashion to the Saints. Tannehill threw 3 picks last week, while Justin Herbert was throwing all over the Miami Dolphins. So I'm going to go with the Chargers simply because I think their offense will be more in sync. I think they'll be able to do more damage. I think the Titans, they're in a bad way right now.
Yeah, I think the Titans are going to grit out some wins this year, but I don't think this is one of them. I think the Chargers take this one by more than the 3 points that they're favored to win by.
The Colts go into Houston, but it's the Texans who are 1.5-point favorites here. But I'm going with the Colts. I like the way they put up a fight against the Jaguars. The Texans, I think that they still have more pieces that they need to align here. The Colts recently were competitive a couple of years back with Jonathan Taylor and that crew. Not that Jonathan Taylor's playing now, but there's more remnants of this team that I think that are available to them. And Anthony Richardson versus CJ Stroud, that's a fun matchup. But I'm going to take Richardson and what they have on the Colts right now.
Yeah, it's a fun game to watch, and it's definitely something I'm going to DVR so I can watch later and watch when I have time. But yeah, I think the Colts have a better vehicle for Richardson to drive right now, and that's just really what it boils down to.
One game I think a lot of people are going to have their eyes on are the Baltimore Ravens at the Bengals. The Bengals are 3-point favorites at home, but man, Joe Burrow threw under 100 yards against the Browns, and everyone's wondering, is he all right? Is it his calf? Is it his hand? Because he hurt his hand in the early part of the game when he took a hit from Zadarius Smith. Can the Bengals figure it out on offense? And can the Ravens figure it out on offense? Because they've got the new offensive coordinator this year. This could be have huge implications with the two AFC North teams that are battling it out. Because I think this will be a very tough division, maybe the toughest division in football. I'm going to go with the Ravens because I need to see that Joe Burrow is 100% healthy, or at least like 80% healthy. He didn't look 60% healthy in this last game.
Yeah, I'm going Ravens too. This is going to be one of those things where the Bengals, and whether it's Burrow's health or anything else, the Bengals got to show that they're for real again this year before I really kind of buy them hook, line, and sinker. Meanwhile, the Ravens look like they're on a path towards getting this thing figured out.
The Chiefs at the Jaguars for the last 1 o'clock game. The Chiefs are 3.5-point favorites here. The Jaguars, they came off a tight win against the Colts, but from what we understand, I believe Chris Jones and Travis Kelce are supposed to be back this week for the Chiefs. So I'll give me Kansas City. I think they handle that business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jacksonville's on a team on the rise, but Kansas City Chiefs are the team that have already risen. Like they're at the Jags are hoping to maybe someday reach where the Chiefs are standing. So yeah, it's got to be Chiefs.
Absolutely. We'll get to the 4 o'clock games and the primetime games on the other side of the break here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter, David Harrison breaking all those things down for you. But first, before we go anywhere else, I would remind you this show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Life is full of twists and turns, and it's important to show up for yourself through all of them. I faced plenty of times in my life where I've tried to shoulder a lot of burdens by myself, but I found answers thanks to help from good therapists. And that's where BetterHelp Therapy Online comes to help. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. This is actual professional therapy done securely online, and it's available to people worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you. BetterHelp makes it easy and free to change therapists if needed. And they have a special offer for our listeners right now. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOn for 10% off for your first month at BetterHelp Therapy Online. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks, the number one place for you to go to play daily fantasy right now. Prize Picks, of course, makes it easy for you to win 25 times your money on any bet this football season. Prize Picks, when you play Prize Picks, all you're doing is picking 2 to 6 players that you think you have a beat on in their fantasy projections for the day, and just say more or less on any of their projections. Think that someone's going to score more touchdowns than they're projected, pick that player. Or if you think they're going to score less, pick them as well. If you picked Justin Jefferson under 100 yards this week, you were wrong, because he put up some numbers for the Vikings in the opening week. But you just string that together. If you thought he was going to do more than that, great. If you thought DeAndre Swift was going to have more than 100 yards on the ground, great. You string those two together, and you have money that you can win right on Prize Picks. It's that easy. Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts, like Taco Tuesday, where each Tuesday Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value with your Prize Picks. So download the Prize Picks app today right on your phone, or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Back here on the Locked On NFL podcast, Chris Carter, David Harrison breaking things down for you here on the Friday edition. We're going to get to the second half of games here, and that is the late afternoon games, 4:00 Eastern time. The Niners are facing the Rams. The Rams are at home, but the Niners are 7-point favorites. David, the Niners looked dominant against the Steelers. I was there for that, and I was very impressed by how they played. Though I was very impressed by how the Rams played Seattle last week as well. This could be a very interesting rivalry if the Rams are back to being a serious team, but I'm taking the Niners in this game.
Yeah, I feel like that Rams-Seahawks game had more to do with what the Seahawks are for real than what the Rams are for real. So I'm going Niners as well. I think that's a smart pick there.
The Giants at the Cardinals. The Giants are 4.5-point favorites despite getting mollywopped 40-0 by the Dallas Cowboys. But listen, it's the Cardinals. They got Josh Dobbs starting. I covered Josh Dobbs. Really nice guy, rocket scientist and all that stuff that he studied when he was in college, Tennessee. But the Giants are getting theirs this one. They have a lot to prove in this game. I feel bad for the Cardinals the rest of the way. It doesn't matter if they have fire in their gut, David. They're taking an L in this one.
Yeah, the Arizona Cardinals, Sam Howell gifted them a defensive touchdown. The Washington Commanders gave away the ball inside the Cardinals red zone in week 1. And still the Arizona Cardinals found a way to lose that game by more than a field goal. So I think it just kind of shows you where the Cardinals are. And I think the Giants are going to get their first win of the season.
The Dallas Cowboys are 9.5-point favorites over the New York Jets, and the Jets are visiting the Cowboys. I'll say this, David. I'm picking the Cowboys to win, but I kind of want to take the Jets with that many points, because whereas I think the Cowboys would do much better now, Aaron Rodgers isn't going to play, Zach Wilson's going to play, but I actually think the Jets defense can create enough problems for the Cowboys offense to make this a less than a 10-point game. So I'm going to take the Cowboys as the overall winner here. But if I was betting on this game using FanDuel Sportsbook's odds, I would take the Jets, because 9.5 points is just a really big spread.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm money line, I'm going Cowboys, but if I'm a spread better, I'm going Jets. I think that, especially this defense, I think the Jets locker room, you have to feel pretty disrespected right now by all the commentary. Aaron Rodgers is great, don't get me wrong, but the loss of one man derailing an entire locker room full of people, the quarterback's most important position, so we get it. But the way that everybody kind of went into disaster mode with the Jets, even in the stadium, I mean, we saw fans just throwing in the towel as soon as Aaron Rodgers leaves the field. I mean, if you're the Jets locker room, you feel pretty disrespected. I think Robert Saleh is the perfect coach to lead a team that feels disrespected. So I definitely don't like that spread. I definitely think the Jets cover that spread, but I do think the Cowboys end up winning the game.
The Commanders are at the Broncos. Commanders eked one out against the Cardinals last week. The Broncos, they are a confusing team. I'm picking the Broncos here at home, man, but I don't feel good about it. I'm not sure what to feel about either of these teams. I just think the Broncos secondary will cause enough turnovers or problems for the Commanders that they'll pull out the win. What say you, David?
Yeah, so I'm going to go the Commanders here, and I think this was kind of the game I thought we might have our first disagreement in this conversation. It's a little bit easier for me to go one way because I do cover the Commanders, and there is, this as well as I do. There is a tendency, like if you want the team you see every day, you you fall kind of into this trap. But what I really liked about the Washington Commanders outside of the play on the field against the Arizona Cardinals was in the second half, Eric Bieniemy, who he admitted to us on Thursday that he is a running back sellout because he's a running back by trade, but he's in love with the pass game. So he admits that he is a sellout. He started the game. I think he started the game against the Arizona Cardinals calling the offense he wants to run, right? But he came out of the locker room after halftime calling the offense his team needed to run. And I think that is an incredibly humble thing for a coach to do. And I think every NFL fan base can relate to having seen coaches, whether it was your team or another team in the past, not be willing to do that and say, no, my scheme is the right scheme. They just need to execute. No, let me change my scheme to fit what my players are doing. And I think that is ultimately what gave the Commanders the win in week 1. And I think that's what's going to bring them into week 2 as well. This defense is firing on all cylinders, and they might be getting Chase Young back. We'll see. He was a full participant in practice Thursday. We'll see how he feels Friday. But yeah, I think the Washington Commanders, I mean, if their defense can show up the way they did against Arizona, then I think that with Eric Bieniemy making smart decisions, and oh, by the way, having won 15 in a row against the Denver Broncos, going back to his time with the Kansas City Chiefs, I think the Washington Commanders can pull this one off.
I think they can. I'm just taking the Broncos in this situation, but I hear all the points that you're making there. Last 4:00 game this is Sunday night game football right here. Dolphins at Patriots. Dolphins are 3-point favorites. The Patriots, they went in when I was covering the Steelers game last week, and I was like keeping my scores open in there, and I was like, okay, the Eagles are up big on the Patriots. That's what I expected. And then I turned back and I'm like, what do you mean it's 19-16? And all of a sudden the Patriots were up in it. Mac Jones put up some decent numbers. I'm saying the Dolphins here, but man, it would not shock me if the Patriots found a way to slow down Tua, keep this at a slower pace because the Dolphins want to play faster pace football, more possessions, more chances to score for both sides. They trust their offense more than anyone else's. I think the Patriots try to slow them down, but the Dolphins still find a way to win.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Dolphins. The Patriots though make me nervous for all the reasons you just said, and I think a lot of people forgot that the Patriots are traditionally a really good team on defense, and they kind of showed that a little bit against Philadelphia Eagles. I think I like the Dolphins to win this game. I think Tua is kind of on a mission, so to speak. There's been a lot of talk from him in the last 12 months about being disrespected, whether it's people nosing into his marriage or other stuff. And I think he's kind of sick of it. And I think that chip on his shoulder gives him a little bit of an extra boost. But yeah, the Pats are a tricky team to bet against. So if I'm building a parlay, I don't know that I keep this game in there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. But I go Dolphins as well.
The Saints on the first game of Monday Night Football here, they are 3-point favorites on the road against the Panthers. I'm taking the Saints because I really like their defense, man. But this is one of those games I'd also stay away from if I'm doing a parlay.
No, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. But I too go to the Saints mainly because that defense, and I know we all want Bryce Young to be this like next great rookie phenom, but I don't know that the Panthers have the tools around him he needs to pull it off. So I like the Saints in that one.
Last game of the week, the final Monday Night Football game, and that's here in Pittsburgh where I'm at right now. I'll be at this game at Acrisure Stadium. The Cleveland Browns come to town. They are 2.5-point favorites over the Pittsburgh Steelers. David, they have not been favored in Pittsburgh, I think, since like 92 or something like that. There's a lot of weird intangibles on the line in this game. They haven't been favored in Pittsburgh in this long. They haven't been 2-0 to start a season since 1993 when Bill Belichick was their head coach. The Steelers haven't lost on Monday Night Football at home, I believe, since 1992. There's just so many weird, intangible things that are on the line here. I was going to pick the Browns until I saw the whole Jack Conklin thing and that he definitely was out for the season and that they're going to have a 4th-round rookie in DeJuan Jones. And listen, I think DeJuan Jones is going to end up being a good tackle. But I do not want my first NFL start coming on the side of TJ Watt. And that's that's why the Steelers aren't starting Broderick Jones right now. They're letting him kind of get through, kind of just watch and get used to the NFL on the bench a little bit. They'll probably bring him in the middle part of the season to replace Dan Moore Jr., who's gone up against Myles Garrett and won against Myles Garrett a couple of times already in his career. But I think when I look at this game, and I think the biggest factor for the Browns is if they run the ball well, they can control the pace of this game, and the Niners ran the ball well. But Last year, they ran the ball well against the Steelers in Week 18, and it didn't matter because that pass rush still kept getting to Deshaun Watson. I think that happens again in this game. I think the Steelers offense finds its footing. It's a close, ugly game, but I think the Steelers find a way to win low scores. Who you got?
You know, I think for a lot of people are going to go Browns here, and I think that when you look at what happened in Week 1, I think like if the Steelers lose to the Niners by even 10 points, you know what I mean, with that Niners defense, if they keep the Steelers down and they lose by even 10 points, I think the Steelers can actually come into this favored. But because of the margin of victory, I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people are kind of spooked in this one. DeJuan Jones is big, physically, but also in this matchup. The thing about DeJuan Jones, and I've already kind of stated on this episode, right? I'm a Buckeye fan, so I kind of naturally gravitate towards Buckeyes. Watching him at the Senior Bowl in person, the dude is massive. That's about all he was. And that's January. You know what I mean? It's been a long time. There's been a lot of training and all that stuff.
Right.
But technically speaking, DeJuan Jones really did not have a lot of the tools that you would want to see. And in the NFL, we all know this. You can't just be big. You can't just be fast. You can't just be strong. You have to be technically sound. If DeJuan Jones is not technically sound, that's going to be a really rough matchup for the Cleveland Browns to win. And that's going to complicate a lot of things on the ground, on the pass. I mean, you know, everything. Again, if you're bad in the trenches, it's hard to be good. I think I'd go Steelers. If I'm going money line, I'm going Steelers in that matchup, basically just because of my lack of confidence in what DeJuan Jones was entering the draft process. And I don't think that they could orchestrate that fast of a turnaround.
The money line is plus 110 for the Steelers, minus 130 for the Browns. Monday Night Football. We got double action. It's going to be a lot of fun this weekend. David, thanks so much for joining me here on the Friday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Those were our picks. Stay tuned to this channel for reactions on Monday. We've got Kevin Ostreicher. He'll be breaking things down with talking to our hosts about the biggest game that happened throughout this weekend. Who came out on top on week 2, and what will your team be looking like? Follow all of your teams on the Locked On Podcast Network, where we're your team every day, and follow right here on the Locked On NFL podcast all week long, Monday through Friday, as we keep breaking down the biggest stories across the league with all of our different hosts. From Chris Carter and David Harrison, we'll see you next week right here on the Locked On NFL podcast.